Have you achieved success and a high income, but still lack personal fulfillment and work-life balance? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful But Struggling podcast. Join us as Aaron, Eunicia, Joanne, and Mim share transformative insights and practical strategies just for you. Discover real stories and lessons that will elevate your personal satisfaction, professional accomplishment, and financial empowerment.
Welcome to another episode of Successful But Struggling. Today, I am here with our leadership expert, Mim Abby, and she's going to be talking more about stress, which is what we've been talking about in this series so much. And so I was wondering, Mim, what your take is on the types of stress people are seeing these days at work.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. Yes, there's a lot of stress at work these days, and I hear about it all the time when I'm out there with clients. And it can be, some of it is the stress that's always there with work, but some of it is that there's been so much change. There's been layoffs, there's been downsizings, there's been some rehiring, but there's still plenty of places where there's still a hiring freeze. And so people are juggling and figuring out, how do I get all the work done, and how do I not be so stressed given that it's me sort of left holding the bag here, or I'm doing, somebody else used to do this other job and now I'm doubling down on theirs. And in fact, there's really three top things that I'm seeing jump out these days, and I'm already getting into the first one, because the first one really is just the workload. And it's for some of the reasons I said, that there have been those changes in terms of having downsides or having these reorgs. And so all of a sudden I'm doing more work than I used to do. And so people are struggling with the volume of tasks, just having a lot of work and a lot of deadlines around those around the work. And sometimes it's just besides the volume of tasks, it's just the demands, that there's very high expectations. I've been in meetings with companies over the last few months, and competition is only getting tighter for the industries that I'm working in. And I'm working in tech, and I'm working in financial services, and I'm working in manufacturing, and I'm working in media, and I'm working in all these different industries. And for most of them, everyone is just getting better, and everyone is getting smarter and faster. And we've got AI coming on. So in terms of being able to compete, besides just the volume of tasks, it's just the high expectations and maybe limited resources. And so there's people who are saying, I don't know when else I'm going to get all this done, because I'm having to put in these extra hours. And frankly, I'm on the edge of burnout here. So just a lot of basic workload stress, Aaron.
Well, and we've talked before in previous episodes about the difference in stress load now, and I still talk about the effects post-pandemic. It's not in our face all the time, but I know as a physician, as someone who specialized in trauma, that the world is not going to recover from the impact of the pandemic for years and potentially decades. And I wonder then how you've been doing this expert leadership coaching for many years, and you've seen different cycles, right? Upturns and downturns in the economy. Now, seeing what's happened through a pandemic. And I wonder, Mim, sometimes things go in cycles. And is there a time that during your career that you can compare what you're seeing now in the industry and what businesses are going through that's like, oh, this is really reminiscent of? Or sometimes I'm hearing industry leaders go, I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this idea of cycles. Well, I'd answer that in two ways. Number one, in terms of just business as usual, there are cycles, and each industry is going to have its cycles during the year. And if it's companies in retail, of course, don't. So, for example, my consulting services are not particularly with companies that are in retail, because once it hits the fall, they are gearing up for holiday season. So that's not the time for them to come in, for me to come in and do some learning, do some development, doing some coaching and executive coaching and coaching teams. And so that's the crazy cycle for them. And then, of course, they have the slower times where they can let down their hair a little bit. But the second thing I'd say, and this is going to sound a little disheartening, but the second thing I'd say is because the world changed so much over, well, over the last decades, but then with the advent of the iPhone, gosh, well over now 10 years ago, and how everyone now is so available. I mean, the cell phone and then the iPhone, everyone is so available and really expected to be available unless people communicate really clearly about the expectations. And now with AI, with technology advancing at the rapid pace it is, I hate to say, Aaron, but I'm seeing in general cycles become more like higher pressure and higher pressure. So if we didn't learn to deal with the stress in the past, then we're late to the game because from a larger perspective, because everyone's trying to compete, all these companies are trying to compete. They're trying to stay in business. We know that there were plenty that have gone out of business with some of the challenging things in the economy in the last couple of decades. And then with the pandemic, certainly that hit some industries extremely hard.
And you talk about pressure, and I have this vision of a pressure cooker. And what I know is that you keep building pressure, you keep building pressure, you keep building pressure. And if you don't if you don't have a release valve to let some of that pressure off, eventually you're going to have an explosion. And you talk about burnout. And it's, as I've learned, working in medicine for, 25, 30 years, and recognizing that industry, which is maybe different than most of them you work in, but talk about a pressure cooker. All the patients are under more stress, and the physicians are under more stress, and the healthcare system and the economics. And it's like the more stressful circumstances you're in, the more of a pressure release valve you have to have. And so I'm just wondering, Mim, like, how are they dealing with that? Because eventually everybody's going to burn out. If the expectation is you have no boundaries, you have no time off, you have to respond immediately. And where, maybe this is another topic, but where are boundaries allowed in order to have the workforce be sustainable and even healthy and sustainable?
Yeah, well, leaders, Aaron, who are savvy to this and onto this and aren't just keeping their head down and responding to every need and making their team respond, making their company respond to every need. Leaders who are looking at the big picture and seeing where this is going, they're making the better choices and they are speaking up. They're doing things like what I would advise is, first of all, to know that always there are going to be rush times. And so we're not talking about those. We're talking about just building stress. But the rush times, we all flex with those. We know that there are some times where we're just going to have to put in those extra hours, and there's an account that's looking to win an account or win an opportunity, or it's quarter end or year end, something like that. We know that there are those times and we flex with those. It's simply that if it's the ongoing thing with no, as you say, it's the pressure cooker with no letting off the steam, then you're in trouble. So one of the biggest things that I recommend that people look at and that leaders look at is to start thinking about, okay, so what are all of these things that we're saying need to get done? And a great question to ask is, does it? Does it really need to get done?
I love that, ma'am. Does it really need to get done?
Exactly. I mean, I've worked with companies recently who've shared with me, what you've got. You've got a company, it's a startup, it grows. At some point, you've got to get some standard operating procedures in place. So you get these systems in place and so that it can keep running and keep growing and it can scale. And so you've got all these systems and here's the way we do things here. And then things change because then there's more growth. And then we add more systems, we add more. And I have had leaders come back to me and say, when we take a hard look at things, there are some procedures or processes or projects that are somewhat duplicative. I mean, it's already sort of being done in another way. So either we cancel one of them or we combine. Like, you really need to look at, is there a creative way to look at things so that we can just be smarter and not just keep piling more on?
Yeah. And I think as I look at things, I always ask, is this relevant now? And sometimes something that was relevant 6 weeks ago may now no longer be relevant. or that certainly 6 months ago or 6 years ago. And so
Yeah.
that's something that I've asked in my industry is the way we're doing this even relevant? Do we need to scrap the whole thing and start over? Or as you say, take off things? And if we're not asking that, or if we don't have that built into the company's system, I can imagine that they could be wasting a lot of time and energy
Yeah.
that's not needed. And these days, we can't afford that extra wastefulness because we need every little ounce of energy and focus and support. It sounds like from the way industries are being run these days.
It's so true. It's so true, Erin. I mean, thinking about really taking a hard look at what are the things we can, and here are my 3 Ds. They are discard, delay, or delegate. So can you just discard it altogether, this particular thing? If you can't, does it have to be done now? Can we do some prioritizing and look at, you know what, really, I'm going to do some triage here. These are the things that have to be done now. This thing could be done later. So maybe we even some things out just in terms of the timing of it. And then sometimes there is another resource we can bring in, whether it's a resource from the outside, whether it's another department, but who could support us in this? And so that's a thought process that I recommend that leaders and that all professionals really think things through.
Yeah. And I love that because it challenges, if you're wanting to grow and expand and succeed, and yet you're saying, actually, let's delay, let's delegate, or let's delete, that might be counterintuitive to what some people think.
Yeah.
And I love that it challenges some maybe fixed ways of thinking. So you're talking about right now, the workload is heavy for people in business. And what other things are you seeing that are adding to the stressors at work these days?
Well, here's the big one that is always there. And yet when the workload goes up, this one gets worse. And this is just the people end of things. It's the interpersonal stress that comes in just with conflict, that there's difficult relationships, maybe between peers, maybe between a reporting relationship, but you got a difficult relationship with someone, or maybe there's some kind of sticky politics going on and there's power dynamics. You feel like, there might be some favoritism here. So that feels from an interpersonal standpoint, what do I do with that? I'm feeling on the outside here, or just a team that's not getting along. There's lack of collaboration, maybe even some toxicity. That's a very overused term these days. And yet sometimes it's very true. Sometimes it's not toxicity. Sometimes it's just, you know what, there's just a little clashing here, but it's something that we can deal with. But there is toxicity. It's just less probably than we imagine it to be. But any of these things can come up.
Yeah. And again, I'm always looking through things as like a trauma lens and thinking about personalities and psychology and understanding from, neuroscience, and just thinking, it makes sense that people are struggling more now than they used to, because again, we've all dealt with more trauma in the last several years than we were used to globally. And so then I wonder if everybody has been impacted by this negative global impact. What can we do about it?
Well, for starters, so many organizations lead there or give an opportunity for their teams, their leaders, their professionals at maybe every level, but to get a better sense of understanding other people. And what I'm talking about is using some personality instruments or some communication instruments. Because here's the thing, with interpersonal challenges and those times that we think it's politics or we think that person is just being a jerk, more often than not, or we think that we are, let me interrupt myself, we think that we are disagreeing about a topic, about a piece of content, a piece of work. We think that we are disagreeing about it. And what the research shows is that actually more often than not, we are just talking about it differently because we express ourselves differently, because we are wired differently. We have a different interpersonal style. So always, door number one, when you're having conflict with someone, it's go back to, and if you haven't had the opportunity, find the opportunity to use an instrument, and whether it's the DISC instrument or the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, or whether it's Insights Discovery, there are so many many organizations use the colors, and there's different systems that use different colors, but to understand just how people are wired and how they tick. And I mean, underneath, we tend to, as human beings, we want all the same things, but how we go about getting those things, or how we go about pursuing, or how we go about talking about those things is actually very different. So let me just say a word of caution, and that is, we never take an instrument like that to pigeonhole anyone or put anyone in a box, because everybody actually has great capacity for everyone has capacity for all the different styles. And it's simply that we tend to find ourselves in one style more than another. Then that's a longer conversation. That would be a great topic for another of our episodes.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, Mim, that I know for my own self as a leader in medicine and somebody who switched jobs and was surrounded by people who were very different than me, that I'd never heard of the DISC assessment. We took the DISC assessment, and it was so eye-opening because it not only gave me better understanding of myself, but we actually posted our DISC assessment results on our office doors so we could go around and see what everyone else's was. And I tell you what, that helped me gain such understanding to say, oh, now I understand why this person behaves this way. We did another team building thing on values. Oh, now I better understand this person because these are the values I live by, and these are the values they live by. And so it helps us understand the filter that we see people through and ourselves. And then the more I can see other people's perspectives, the better the relationship gets, whether or not they're making any extra efforts. But I know I can make more effort because I better understand myself and them and where our differences are. So I love that you brought up those assessments, because some people will say, oh, those things, I'm not going to categorize people. I'm not going to categorize myself, like it's demeaning. And I'm like, it's just raising awareness about possibilities. And I think it allows us to be curious. I wonder what's going on in that person's head. Let me get curious and find out. I wonder, have you ever done a DISC assessment or a Myers-Briggs or another assessment, and get curious and then go, aha, now I can be better in this relationship because I better understand.
It's so true. It's so true. And to your point, it is a tool. It is not a lockbox. It's a tool to open up your understanding, but to never say, and in fact, I'm really pretty stern with my clients about this. We never say, oh, that person is a blah, like naming their style, like they're a this, they're a that. It's really the proper way to think about it is that person leads with this. That person leads with that style. That person leads with that style because they have the access to the other styles within them. That's also what the research shows. You have everything. You have all the goods. You just tend to lead. Most of us aren't even aware of what we lead with, but we tend to lead more with one, sometimes two styles.
Well, and that's one of the things I so appreciate about you, Mim, is that I recognize that you're an expert and you've been leading with not just one of these assessments. We've shared you assess with multiple different assessments because each one has a different twist, a different flair, a different sense, and might be a better fit. And so what I love about you is that you understand the nuances, where somebody who's new, they might think, oh, the DISC is the only assessment. It's like trying to use one tool like a hammer to build a house. And you understand, no, there are different tools. They can be used different ways. And this is when it's appropriate. And I can just tell that level of expertise when we have had conversations about this throughout the last few years. And I just appreciate that level of wisdom that you use along with the tools you use. And I just so respect that knowledge and expertise because they can be used, just like anything, could be used in a negative manner against people with somebody who doesn't have the deep understanding like you do.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah. So we've talked about the workload people are facing. We've talked about the extra demands on people dealing with stress at work. What's the other big thing that you're seeing in the workplace with all the consulting that you've been doing, Mim?
Yes. Well, I have to say, this third one is in some ways really related to the first two. It doesn't have to be, but oftentimes it is related. And it just is that sense that you're not in control. And I mean, from whatever level, you might be an executive and you feel a lack of control. You might be an
Oh,
individual contributor, but that sense of, I'm not in control here, because it does feel like it's a dicey environment. And so it could be that there's been some unclear expectations and you feel like, I think I know the direction I'm going, but that the CEO said, or that my leader said, or that my peers, and when we decided, other leader peers, did we set, how clear are these expectations of really what that focus is? Or you feel like, let's say you're reporting to somebody. Again, you could even be a leader, but you still feel like you're under their thumb because you feel like, you know what, they're kind of micromanaging me here. And anytime anybody feels a lack of autonomy is one of our greatest needs. It's one of our greatest drivers. And anytime anyone feels a lack of that, you start to feel that lack of control, and it's really frustrating. And it just might be that that lack of control could be the unclear expectations or the micromanagement, or it could just feel like, I don't feel like I am really growing here. So I feel like I'm not in control of my career. Either way, it's just that feeling of lack of control.
and I wonder, and I know that that's a common thing that I see in the physicians and the healthcare providers that I coach, because there is so much less autonomy in general. And I wonder too, as we talk about the speed at which things are changing. And so if you think about what it was like maybe back 50 years ago, you get hired at a company, you might be there with them your entire career and you retire from that company. And now the speed of which we're hiring and moving positions seems to just keep getting faster and faster. So there's not a lot of stability for us to feel in control. And when I was just talking about, is it relevant? And maybe something that was relevant 6 weeks ago is no longer relevant. That speed of implementation and speed of change, I think, would definitely play a role in that lack of feeling in control. Because when do we ever just get to coast even a little bit and say, oh, it's smooth sailing now? I don't think that's happened for many companies in quite some time.
No, it's so true. Over the last few years, I've thought several times about 2 months before the pandemic. I spoke to a large group of corporate attorneys for a large company, international company. So they brought in all these attorneys from all over, and the topic they asked me to come in and speak about was dealing with performing and performing. They need high performance. I mean, they require high performance. This is one of the world's top companies. And so high performance and peak performance during times of change and stress, because they were going through a lot of change and stress. And this is 2 months before the pandemic. And so none of us had any idea what was happening. And I remember thinking, as the pandemic set in, and then as it was clear that it was not going to last 2 weeks, that it was going to go on and on. And I remember thinking, well, that was great timing, because people needed to be equipped with some tools and they had no idea how much. And you know what you're making me think, Aaron, another great topic for us to have an episode about is just change. And what comes to mind for me is, when you're talking, is in general, we don't like change because it makes us feel unstable and unsteady. And what's happening here, I don't know what's happening. We kind of like to know what's happening. Not all the time. We kind of
Our body and our brains want homeostasis.
Exactly.
And that's what our brains are trained to keep, even when it's not healthy.
Yeah. And so we just what we would say is that if you haven't decided, if you haven't made the decision, you know what? I am going to become a master of change, a master of navigating change. I'm going to make it my business to understand some of the things that you just said, Aaron, some of the things about really understanding how human beings tend to react, respond to change, and how, because we can't, there's so much change and it can bring stress, is knowing that that's probably not going to change. Change is not going to change. That rather than try to run away from it, it's okay. I'm going to get myself better equipped than I ever have been. And so that would simply be an encouragement that I would give.
I love that. So you've talked about stresses at work, how this is a bit of an unique time with the stresses that people are facing. You talked about the great workload that people are dealing with. You talked about the status of the people that are doing the work and the different demands on them. And you talked about people feeling out of control. And then what I love about this is there's always something we can do different. And I loved how you were like, yeah, we're dealing with these things. Think about those steps. What can you do to decrease the workload? You talked about the 3 Ds. What can people do to learn more about what others around them are going through and themselves? And then what are the things we can do to help embrace things that help us feel more in control, like getting better at managing change? Mim, you just knocked it out of the park. I love, love, love these different ideas. And I can see where this is going to resonate with so many different individuals that are dealing with stress, because people who are, if you're listening to this, you're probably working. You're probably struggling with a few things. And I took some notes and I can't wait to implement some of your strategies. And thank you so much for your wisdom as always. And with that, it's another episode of Successful But Struggling. Stay tuned for more wisdom and advice to keep getting more and more successful with less struggle. We'll see you there.
Don't miss out on more strategies that will elevate you to new heights. Visit successfulbutstruggling.com now, where you'll discover exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with each of us individually. There you can dive deeper into how you, too, can take your personal and professional game to the next level. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Number 1, connect with us on the website. And number 2, tune in to the next episode.